Today's section, we're going to be looking at the yamas, and those are ahimsa, which is non-violence, Satya, which is truthfulness, Asteya, which is non-stealing, brahmacharya, which is often interpreted as celibacy, but can also be interpreted as non-excess or proper conservation of vital forces, Aparigraha, non-possessiveness, non-greed. So these are the 5 yamas, and these are the very basic foundation of yoga practice. When you go to big retreats or big public gatherings where people are practicing yoga, and you talk to the people there and you get a sense of who they are, and every now and then you might think to yourself, hopefully non-judgmentally, these people are nice, but they don't seem to manifest the qualities that I see or I imagine to be in, say, Yogananda or Ramana Maharshi or some of these other realized individuals. And that's because, at least this is my opinion, most of the time people are not practicing the full power of yoga. I was just visiting with my teacher, Roy Davis, and he said the same thing. He said people write to him and they ask, can I be initiated into Kriya? Can you teach me Kriya? And he says, I know what they're asking. He says, what they're asking is, can you teach me a set of techniques? Can you teach me the Kriya Pranayama, life force arousal? And what they don't realize is that the practice of yoga is all-encompassing. The philosophy and methodologies laid out in the Yoga Sutras, the psychological growth process described in the allegory of the Bhagavad Gita, this is the full practice of yoga, the full practice of Kriya Yoga. And if you think about it, I'm sure many of you have advanced training. Again, in the previous section, I talked about becoming a medical doctor and all that's involved in becoming a medical doctor. General practice, oncology, gynecology, podiatry, whatever it might be. People who want to become doctors, they know, hopefully in advance, that they're going to have to give their full attention for maybe 8 or 12 years of their life to become a doctor, to understand what it means to have that responsibility, to minister to others in that way. And those who are serious about becoming a doctor, they're committed to working those long shifts. They're committed to doing those days and weeks and months of study and preparation, not to mention going to school to understand what it means to be a doctor. They're going to learn the full capacity of what it means to be a doctor, and they're going to do that for 8, 10, 12 years. Again, I'm not sure how long it takes. I know it's somewhere close to that upper range, that upper limit. And that's to become a medical doctor. That's to become someone who understands drugs or surgery or radiation or whatever it might be, so that they can do their best to minister to people. We're talking about something else here, in a sense. We're talking about learning to be internally peaceful in this world of change. We're talking about learning to realize the timeless essence of your being that threads through this lifetime, theoretically previous and future lifetimes, that is one with and attuned to, a part of, seamlessly related to, it's really one whole thing, what our concepts of God, our notions of God indicate or point to. This is what we're doing. This is what our aim is. And so, if we're going to do this, think about how this compares to becoming a medical doctor, which in and of itself is extremely intensive, or a PhD in physics, or a nuclear physicist, or a master musician, or an Olympic athlete. Those are all worldly things that can be defined through various milestones through time. We're talking about something that's getting you related to, involved with, your timeless nature. So the question is, have you really thought about that? Have you really considered what you are wanting? Maybe you came to this practice because you read Autobiography of a Yogi and you were thrilled by the stories, and you didn't necessarily read in between the lines to get the morals of the stories, but nonetheless it got you thinking about this. And you thought it would be very nice to have that kind of peace. Maybe some of you did, in fact I think many of you did, considered, well, what did Yogananda do to have that kind of peace, to have that kind of realization? Did he give 10% of his time to it? Did he give 20% of his time to it? Or from a very young age, did he start giving all of his time to it? And you know the answer to that. He started giving all of his time to it. Now, we don't want to get hung up on age here, because life itself is a spiritual practice. So, for example, James Lin, one of Yogananda's most advanced disciples, met Yogananda when he was in his 40s. I believe it was his 40s. And he started Kriya meditation then, and within 5 years, he was considered to be quite an example of what the practice reveals. But he was successful in a shorter amount of time, and one of the reasons why, if we go back to our earlier idea, he was an extremely successful businessman. He knew what it took to build $1 million business, and that was back in the 30s and the 40s, when $1 million was probably quite a bit more nowadays, inflation. So he had the skills. The same skills allowed him to be successful in business, allowed him to be successful in yoga practice. The same skills allow a person to become a successful doctor, allows you to be successful in yoga practice. The same skills that have allowed you to become a successful carpenter, a successful seamstress, a successful insurance agent, a successful massage therapist. Those same skills, those same things, a successful gardener, that allowed you to become good in that area. That dedication, that focus, that attention, that time, that's the exact same thing that will give you the capacity to be successful in your Kriya Yoga practice. So across the board, it's going to be the same thing. And what you'll find is the more successful you are with your meditation practice and getting involved in these stages of yoga, such as the yamas and niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and so on, the more successful you become in their application, the better you will be in the rest of the things of your life too. You'll become a better musician, you'll become a better gardener, you'll become a better cook, you'll become a better whatever it is that your vocation is, because you will then be able to focus and devote your time. It's all about time and devotion. Now, many of you have written to me and have said, but what about those teachers who say all you have to do is just be, and it'll work out. You don't have to try to do anything. And this is very common in the non-dual circles, and I somewhat appreciate the non-dual circles. And I'm not trying to be judgmental here, although I'm sure it comes out that way. All that was birthed by Ramana Maharshi in the sense of the modern wave of non-dualism. So go back to Ramana Maharshi, stick with him. If you are happy and entertained by modern philosophers, that's fine as well. But consider, when you say you don't have to do anything, well, that's like saying, in order to build a house, you don't have to do anything, just sit there. We'll bring all the lumber, we'll bring all the wood, we'll bring all the nails, but nothing gets done. So you have to be very clear that this does take work. This does take time, attention, devotion. It's not just going to happen. We talked earlier in the previous class about how one teacher had said, you can force enlightenment as readily as you can force the sun to rise. And that no practices really generate enlightenment. But what they do is they allow you to be awake when it happens, to be conscious of it when it happens. So it keeps you awake until the sun actually does rise, and you can appreciate the beauty of that dawn and the day ahead. That's what practices really, truly do. And if you are able to develop some sort of discipline, such as Kriya Yoga, and then you can simply be still, like the non-dualists say, that's a wonderful joining, that's a wonderful combination. Because, again, think of the idea of just be there, just be still, just be. Well, if you're there and you're asleep, where are you going to miss it, right? And if you don't agree with this understanding, that's completely all right as well. Stick with the teachers, stick with the understanding that allows you to experience what is most important to you. But from my experience personally, talking to others who've been successful with this kind of work, really successful with this kind of work, not that they're able to talk the talk, but they actually walk the walk, they understand that we have to engage all of our life. We have to realize how important this is. And we have to realize that there's a reason there is this process of the limbs of yoga to incrementally, step by step, help us mature into, evolve, so that we can remain pristinely aware and awake when the light of consciousness becomes known to us or conscious to us. Now again, one individual in our previous class of this Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course mentioned how the Yoga Sutras start out with Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the cessation of fluctuations in the field of consciousness. And he thought, well, those are just techniques. That's just a start. According to this other Buddhist idea and so on, that's not the end all. Well, of course it's not. But you have to learn to experience that first before the other thing reveals itself. The Yoga Sutras are perfect with their descriptions of the fact that our problem is not abiding as the self and misidentifying ourselves with a temporary form. And to be still, to truly be still and abide as the self, again, it usually takes, if people are honest, some form of discipline and training to learn how to do that. But to be still will allow the light of consciousness to be appreciated when it does dawn. Ramana Maharshi, he was the sort of instigator, in a sense, of this modern idea of just be still, because he said, it's very simple, really. All you have to do is be still. But again, that being still, what he meant was not just sit there like a rock and keep thinking all your same thoughts and keep feeling all the same things. He meant be still. Let go of the fluctuations of the emotional body. Let go of the fluctuations of the mind. Let all of that exhaust itself. Let all of that exhaust itself. And then be in that silence, that stillness. And when you are in that stillness and that silence, you are then alert, yet relaxed and awake. And when the dawn comes, you are perfectly, supremely prepared for it, to appreciate it, to recognize it as your very self. Now again, I use that term, remain alert, yet awake and relaxed, and I had to describe that in a previous class, so I just want to reiterate it now, because I remember when I first got interested in Kriya Yoga and meditation, I was very adamant and vigorous and focused and forceful, and I was not nonviolent. I did not practice ahimsa. And I would really try to get in there, and I must force myself to be awake. Like, you gotta force a door open. But that's not at all what it means. And I learned that in time. What I mean when I say be alert yet relaxed, again, the description I give that I can think of that makes the most sense to me, of course you will have your own experience of it when it arises, but the description that I can think of is, imagine you're outside, and I like to be outside. In fact, that's one of my most enjoyable things to do. Those of you who have become aware of the KriyaYogaOnline.com website, KriyaYogaOnline.com, you'll notice that I'm trying to stick with just nature pictures. You don't need to see me. I know many of you have made comments about why I don't do video. Well, you don't need to see me. You don't. It's not important. What you need to do is pay attention to what's being said and apply what's being said. But nature, I love nature. That's why I put these pictures up, to get you thinking about nature. Maybe it'll inspire you to start going out into nature more. And the reason I love it so much is because it gives an immediate sense, oftentimes, of that alert yet awake stillness. Because if you're in nature and you come upon, I remember one day I was walking down a path and I came upon a bear, a black bear. I knew there were bears along this path. But this bear, I was just walking around the turn, and it just happened to be on the other side of that turn, walking away from me. So I was within 5 feet of this gigantic black bear. In that moment, I was pristinely awake, alert, and aware. I did not panic because I knew there were bears around. I saw the bear. I just turned around and walked the other way. That's a somewhat maybe adrenaline-induced alert yet relaxed. But let's take it to another example. Let's take it to those days when I walk by the river, or I sit by a lake, or I like to walk to a mountaintop, and I observe the view of all the trees and the sky and the clouds and the radiant sun shining down on the water. When I see that, and all I'm aware of is that, there are no thoughts, there are no emotions per se, there is just the awareness of this life that is all around me, that I'm able to observe with my ears, with my skin, with my eyes, with my nose, and so on. That is that kind of alert yet relaxed awareness I'm talking about, that we're aiming to bring into your meditation practice. And why is it difficult to do that? Because when you sit down and you close your eyes, what are you left with? Yourself. At least your small sense of self most of the time. And what is your small sense of self? It is a collection of all the things that your parents, family, and friends made you feel or instigated in you in childhood. It's your doubts, it's your fears, it's your idiosyncrasies, it's your cravings, it's your quirks, it's your negative, repetitious emotional states, or it's your over-optimism. And that can be maddening for those who are not somewhat emotionally balanced first, which again, I'm going to stress this over and over again, which is why I advise, before even becoming involved in some sort of intensive meditation practice, forget about preparing so you don't have Kundalini syndrome. Let's just talk about the reality of the fact that you need to be mentally and emotionally as healthy as possible, so when you sit down, you are not overwhelmed and overrun by all this stuff, this unprocessed, undigested things within your consciousness. So it takes some time to settle into that. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And the practices themselves give you some kind of detachment from them, so you're more easily able to deal with them. Also, the practices of the yamas, which we're going to focus on today, and the niyamas, the first limb, the first step in any yoga practice, ideally, if it's based on the Yoga Sutras, if you can pull off, if you can work with, if you can embody these self-regulating behaviors, the yamas and the niyamas, the interpersonal practices, you're a long way to mental and emotional health, because it takes a good deal of mental and emotional health to truly activate and embody these things. So that's why it can be very good for you to give the majority of your time and attention throughout the day to contemplating the yamas and the niyamas, and have a little review every now and then. Say, all right, how could I have been nonviolent? How could I have been more truthful? How could I have conserved my vital resources? And then the next day when the opportunity arises, you put it into action. And the more you do that, the more mentally and emotionally healthy you become, the easier it becomes for you to meditate, the better you embody these foundational practices. And then it makes it much easier to move on to asana, pranayama, pratyahara, internalization of attention. It makes it easier for you to do these things. So that's why we want to focus on these yamas and these niyamas, because they are the foundation for the entire practice. They will protect you from any kinds of dangers or difficulties that occur during the practice, which mainly occur due to violence towards yourself, not being aware of how to take care of yourself and have compassion for yourself as you go through this process. And then it will be much easier for you to understand what your self-realized heroes understood, what those people that you're aiming to embody. And then you will no longer have to be one of those people that goes to all these talks to just hear someone say, just be yourself. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything else. You won't have to go anymore, because now you will know it yourself, and you will understand what it actually took to truly exist in a stillness, to truly, really be able to simply be yourself. Now that's the focus of our talk today. So let's consider the first yama, ahimsa, or nonviolence. And these things have to be applied to our entire life, They have to be applied to our meditation, to our exercise, to our diet, to the way we interact with friends and loved ones and family, to the way we treat ourselves, to the way we think. Ahimsa, nonviolence. It's being compassionate towards yourself and others. It's being kind to others. It's doing things that don't hurt yourself. So let's say you want to meditate 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes in a day. But let's say, truly, at this point in time, you only have the capacity to meditate about 20 minutes effectively. And then the rest of the time, the next 30 minutes or so, you're just sort of forcing yourself to focus. You're giving yourself little mental strain. And then when you get up and go through your day, you just don't quite feel right because you just pushed yourself too hard. In the same way that when you go to the gym to exercise, you do to your limit. You let your body heal for a day or two. You come back, you do it again, and you get stronger day by day. You don't go in one day and try to lift all the weight within the 30-minute period, and then the rest of the day you're wiped out. You can't do anything for the rest of the week because you're sore and you're exhausted and your family needs you, and you see what happens there. So with ahimsa, when we think about our meditation practice, we have to be nonviolent in it. Now, it doesn't mean that you're lazy. That doesn't mean that you don't try to push yourself a little bit more. And we've already discussed this in the previous class about setting up an effective meditation routine and how to do that and how to push it a little bit more. So I'm not going to get into that. But you do have to be very conscious of what your limits are. Go just slightly beyond those limits and then let that be enough. Again, you have to practice santosha, the niyama of contentment afterwards, to let things happen in the same way that when you plant a garden, you have to be content to put the seeds in the ground, water them, forget about them, water them, forget about them. You have to have that contentment to do that. The same is true with meditation. Ahimsa, when it comes to your diet, many people, and this is fine and it's a wonderful practice, become a vegetarian because they don't want to hurt animals. Okay, I don't want to hurt animals either. It disturbs me to see any kind of animal being harmed. I don't even harm insects or bugs if I can help it. If a mosquito bites me, I try to blow it off my skin rather than slap it. If it won't go away, sure, eventually I'll say, all right, that's enough. and I will slap it. But I try my best to blow it away at first. If I see a spider, even a scorpion in the room, I'll go scoop it up. I know that they're going to sting or bite, so I get the proper material, and I scoop it up and I throw them outside. I can't stand bees or wasps. They scare me to death because I've been stung by them, and I tend to swell up pretty good. So any of you who want to assassinate me, just get some bees and stick them in my room. But anyway, even bees, I will try to remove. And I will. I don't think I've ever really killed a bee on purpose since my mid-20s. But that's a kind of nonviolence. When it comes to diet, if you want to become a vegetarian, to practice nonviolence, that's perfectly fine. The thing that creates kind of a gray area, and those of you who don't like gray areas, you're in the long run not going to like my teaching style, I think, because I've actually developed quite a bit more gray areas than I used to have when I was in my 20s and a little more overzealous. When you're practicing ahimsa with diet, you also have to be non-harmful to yourself. And some people do better eating eggs or having meat occasionally, chicken or fish. It works better for them for whatever reason. I don't know. You can say it's eat right for your blood type, whatever it might be. And the joke I always make is it was always funny because my wife, she became a pretty hardcore vegetarian in her teens. And I used to have meat parties, as you know, probably from previous talks in college, where I would invite people over on Friday nights and we'd grill and grill and grill, and I was wonderful and I loved making all the sauces. But then I eventually became a vegetarian. And in time, after about 5 years, I became a little less. I would eat shrimp. And then 10 years, I would eat chicken. And now I'll eat meat maybe once every 2 weeks, something like that, if that. I don't go out looking for it, but if someone's serving it, it's not a big deal. And what we discovered with the Eat Right for Your Blood type was that my wife was supposed to be the meat eater, and I was supposed to be the vegetarian. And we were sort of innately reversed in that regard. But that doesn't matter. I don't know how accurate those things are. It was just a funny thing to notice. But even now, when we would talk to people and they say, well, are you vegetarian? I would say yes, because theoretically, most of the time I was vegetarian. If I ate meat once every 2 weeks or more often once a month, compared to the rest of the United States, I was pretty much a vegetarian. And even when I did eat meat, it was maybe just a little bit of chicken or a little bit of shrimp. But my wife's like, of course he's not a vegetarian. He eats meat at least once a month. So it was always interesting to have that conversation. So in this regard, the point about this is that when it comes to nonviolence, you have to take care of your own body as well. You cannot practice violence against your own body. If that means that you are starving yourself of a nutrient that you actually need for whatever reason, and only you can determine if that's true or not. Your doctors can help you determine if that's true. I'm not going to get into what is a good reason. I'm not a medical doctor. Then what you do is when you do have meat, you can be extremely thankful for the sacrifice that animal made. We're all sacrificed to something. This whole world is this sort of replenishing of sacrifice. Animals and plants and whatnot. When we eat them, they become a part of our body, a part of our temple. And if that temple is consecrated to God, higher consciousness, then they become a part of that consecration process. Just like us, when we practice prayer or devotion to our concept of God, we are sacrificing ourselves to divinity. We are feeding, and this is a really poor word choice, but hopefully your intellectual skills and contemplative skills will understand the point I'm trying to make here. We are feeding our higher self. So there's this thread of sacrifice moving from lower to higher. Plants eat rocks and minerals. Animals eat plants, which have eaten the rocks and the minerals. People can, if they choose, to just eat the plants or to eat the animals, whatever it may be. We see how this cycle goes on. So if you want to get in a very deep philosophical debate about ahimsa and nonviolence, you need to contemplate it for yourself, because at the end of the day, this is a very good thing to have arguments about. And that's about all. Because you have to understand what nonviolence means to you. And then you have to stand strong in that. And you don't have to worry about defending it to other people, because putting yourself in a situation where you have to defend your actions, your activities, that will become endless and a waste of your time and not brahmacharya. So when it comes to nonviolence and diet, we have to consider this. Also consider people who unintentionally abuse their bodies by being supplement junkies. In Ayurveda and in many other forms of medicine, supplements are wonderful when they're really actually truly needed, but most of us just hop online or hear from our buddy, you need to try this supplement. And many people overload themselves on supplements and put excessive strain on their body. So do you really need all the supplements you're taking? This is another thought about ahimsa. Ahimsa, more obviously, is not being cruel to others, not abusing others physically, mentally, or emotionally. It means also not saying bad things about other people. There can be people that you know that you don't like, that do things differently, and I've had this issue throughout my life where I see people doing something and I've been a very judgmental person, and I would say things like, well, that's not a good idea. I don't know what they're thinking. In the back of my mind, I would think how stupid that is. And that is not nonviolence. That is violence. And so I had to train myself to catch that thinking process. And again, maybe it came from past life habits, theoretically. Maybe it came from the culture I grew up in. Who knows? But it was there. And so whenever I would have a thought or an inkling of negative judgment towards someone else, I had to immediately say no and stop it and bring up a feeling of loving kindness towards them, of love and kindness and support and grace. Because I don't know where they've come from. I don't know what kind of experiences they've had. I don't know why they're doing the things that they're doing. But they are an aspect of divine consciousness as well. And to love that is a very great and powerful thing. So when we speak, when you're talking to your friends, don't talk bad about other people. Just don't do it. Learn from me. If you can learn anything at all, learn this. In your mind, don't think those thoughts. You have to become conscious of when you're thinking those thoughts and do something else to stop it. Whether it becomes known and you just start making la 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 sound in your mind to stop it, that's fine. Or if you chant Om or redirect your attention to something else, stop it. Train yourself to stop it. This is a part of nonviolence. If you think about hurting someone else, that is violence. So these things, these practices, they are not simply activities that express outwardly. They are also internal activities. They are also internal activities that you have to master. Like in Autobiography of a Yogi, when Yogananda is meditating with Sri Yukteswar and a mosquito lands on his lap, and Sri Yukteswar says to him, well, go ahead and finish the job. And Yogananda steps back. What do you mean? He says, well, you've already dealt the killing blow in your mind, so you might as well finish it, because if you do it in your mind, it's the same as doing it in reality. So that's why we have to become conscious of this and start to resolve this issue. And again, you also have to do it non-violently. So you don't want to beat yourself up. You want to practice compassion for yourself. You want to practice contentment, that you did your best and know that you did, and then move on in a content space. So nonviolence stretches to many things. It stretches to your physical exercise. Again, the people who exercise so much that they put excess strain on their body. You don't need to exercise that much unless you're going to be a professional athlete. Then exercise all you want. Do some research on interval training and how effective that is at changing your genes, at improving your heart rate, at strengthening your muscles without exhausting your body. Something for you to consider. When it comes to your mind, you need to practice ahimsa. When it comes to your actions, you practice ahimsa. Is there going to be a perfect practice of ahimsa? Not in this world. Not in this world. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time and energy. You're not going to be practicing brahmacharya, trying to save every little microbe that you might step on, or you get the idea. So temperance, moderation needs to be practiced with nonviolence as well. But the goal is to be a clear vehicle for true loving kindness in all aspects of your life, in your mind, towards yourself, towards others, in activity, and so on. This is ahimsa. Satya, truthfulness. We've already spent quite a lot of time on Satya, truthfulness in the previous class, but it's worth revisiting. Satya, truthfulness. What is it? The most basic way of understanding Satya and truthfulness is simply telling the truth. Someone asks you a question, you respond truthfully. If you have something hurtful to say, you don't have to speak at all. That's one most basic level of it. In everything that you do, have integrity. Have integrity. If you're checking out and someone gives you change for your groceries and they accidentally give you $5 too much, you give them the $5 back. Truthfulness. It goes much deeper than that, because you also have to be true to yourself as a unique expression of God, divine consciousness in this world. You have your body, your personality, the mind that you have that because it is an integral part of this whole within the temporal scheme of things, within the changing scheme of things. Think about if everyone wanted to be a guru. Well, that would be horrible. Nothing would ever get done. But we need engineers, we need nurses, we need writers, we need musicians, we need gardeners, we need stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home dads. We need all these things. And this is just more of the outward activity. We need people who want to do things that are sort of out of this world, outrageous, because it inspires others to expand their mind abstractly. So you need to practice truthfulness for yourself as well. And this is probably one of the most difficult yamas because of its subtlety and because of the fact that it requires, in and of itself, a level of development and patience, especially when we think about being true to yourself. When you're a kid and you have all these things that you want to do and see and be, a lot of that can be influenced by peers. A lot of that can be influenced by what family says. And so as we get into our late teens and early 20s, we start to work out what really do we want to be doing? What is true for us? You know, one of my friends, he was really interested in chemistry and botany, especially physics and whatnot. And that was because he had a lot of coaching or coaxing from his family. But as he got into his 20s, he quit studying that. He developed a deep interest in studying bats, little flying mice with wings, bats. And due to that interest, he followed it. He followed the truth of that. And he ended up developing some sort of computer program and device that helped to track maybe the migration of bats or something like that. And it was quite helpful to the world of bats. But he had to go through the sort of weeding out process of what is true for him. People who are different in regards to their sexual orientation, oftentimes they have a lot of negative influence from church that they grew up in possibly, or they're afraid of their family, or they don't know what their friends will think, and so they're not true to themselves, and they don't live as freely, as happily as they could. They're wasting all that energy keeping this secret. They're not practicing brahmacharya here, conservation of vital forces, because they're wasting that energy keeping this down out of fear. Now, of course, maybe there are some cultures where it's very important to keep that down because you don't want to get stoned or beheaded or whatever they may do in some cultures. I don't know. But that is also an example of, are you being true to yourself in that regard? When it comes to your feelings about what you want to be doing in life and maybe how it relates to your spouse, and you don't follow what you really want to be doing because you're afraid of what your spouse would say, or because they want you to make a certain amount of money, and you know that if you take this chance to maybe start your own business or do that thing which is really passionate for you, which is going to take a while to become financially successful at, if that's part of the issue, you never do it. And so the rest of your life, you're not practicing truthfulness. So when we consider this idea of truthfulness, we have to think about it on a very broad level. And we have to embrace and honor our temporal sense of self, the sense of self that's in time, that's here to act in the world in a certain way, while we learn to identify with and really figure out what is our timeless sense of self, which is the ultimate goal of yoga. So being truthful with our limited sense of self is just as important as being truthful in our higher sense of self. So every day it is important for you to contemplate, am I being truthful? Now, this does not mean that you become compulsively truthful, where you just run your mouth nonstop about what you think and whatnot, because what you think may not necessarily be true. All right. So that's why sometimes keeping your mouth shut is helpful. Silence is golden, they say. But there may be certain themes throughout your life where you know really that you're not being truthful, that something happens and you can't stand it, but you never say, look, I don't want you to cross this boundary anymore. You have to learn to express that truth. And if other people are disturbed by it, that is their issue. That is their karma to work out. As long as you are not doing it in a violent, aggressive, egotistical way, as long as you know that it is really deeply a truth for you to express, you need to start expressing it. You need to start embodying the truth, letting go of fear so that you can embody whatever your truth might be. So this is the way it works in life. If you want to get up every morning at 6 a.m., but your spouse complains that you make too much noise, well, if it's really, truly important for you, well, get up at 6 a.m. and instead go for a walk or do something outside. So there might be areas where there have to be compromise, but still requires you yourself to at least admit the truth and work with that truth with the other people around you. So it's not a problem to compromise when you are in a relationship that is long-term and committed that will require that, because two different people, they're not always going to be on the same page. So don't go thinking that you need to find the most perfectly aligned spiritual partner, because that's another waste of your time and your energy. If you've got someone that's nice and supportive and loving and kind and you get along and you've got some similar interests, they don't all have to be similar, you're doing well. If you've got someone that you can talk to, that you can be yourself with, you're doing well. If you don't, start nudging the relationship in that direction. The relationship itself will become more beautiful because the relationship itself will also start to resonate with more truth. The same thing, encourage others to be truthful. That's where non-judgment comes in. Because people, they're not themselves because they don't want to be judged. And you are all humans. We're all humans. You know, probably from yourself and others that you have maybe gotten little insights into their character, that humans are weird. They have a lot of strange ideas based on whose perspective you're looking at. But it's okay. Wherever those strange ideas come from, they can still be honored and you can still love the person. And you'll find that the more trusting you can be of another person or inspire that trust, the more they open up, even if they say the weirdest things, if you just continue to love them and be with them, that relationship will become very deep. An example with my wife, we're very different on certain levels. I'm a little more outer space, or thinking about things that might not necessarily matter so much, philosophical. She's a little more practical, grounded, down to earth. But over time, she's learned to listen to me, to express these ideas that, no one really cares about. But I find them to be fascinating. Whether it's thinking about what a tardigrade is or some interesting little tidbit I discovered about space. Well, I guess she's kind of interested in those things because she does like science. But anyway, she learned to listen and allow me to express. And that deepened our relationship. Just like, while I'm not necessarily so interested in quality improvement of hospitals and quality improvement of other health systems and public health, I'm kind of interested in that because I find it fascinating in regards to the overall consciousness of humanity. But I've learned to just simply, when she's really on a topic that she's passionate about, just listen, and I'll pay attention to the things that I find interesting within that and speak to it. So we're allowing her to express what is true for her true interests as well, without any kind of judgment or so on. So truthfulness is this kind of across-the-board practice that has to be there. When it comes to your meditation, how do you practice truthfulness in meditation? You let things be what they are. You don't make things up. Meaning that you sit down to meditate and all you're doing really is your mantra and your breath awareness. And no profound realizations dawn, and that's just fine. You don't try to make something out of it. You don't try to dig deeper. You just sit with it. You be in the moment, in the truth of the moment. And that will overlap into the rest of your life, where you'll be sitting on a bus. And what is the truth of that moment? That you're sitting on a bus. All those thoughts, all those worries can go away, because that's not the truth of the moment. And that also ties into this idea of brahmacharya, non-excess, excessive worrying, excessive thinking, excessive emotions. That they're a waste of energy. And again, if you're practicing Satya or truthfulness, you're going to be less likely to think too much, to worry too much. Now, of course, you will think when it is necessary, and you will feel when it is necessary. Someone you love gives you a hug, and you feel all warm inside. Perfect time to feel all warm inside. You're in an argument with someone, and they're just not listening. Perfect time to be angry. But then when that argument passes, when the hug passes, what are you doing? You're just walking down the street. You're just sitting on the bus. You're just taking a bath. You're just eating dinner. So that Satya, that truthfulness, is being true to the moment. What is true in the moment? And when you're meditating, what is true in the moment? Just simply be with that. When you're practicing asana, or a meditation posture, or you're exercising, can you truthfully sit in that posture and meditate well? Can you truly sit in a full lotus posture without your knees driving you crazy and your back hurting and your legs falling asleep? Well, if you're being true to yourself and you're not practicing violence toward yourself, you will modify those things to where you are comfortable and you can still sit in strength. And then you will move just a little bit more at a time to allow you to move into that posture if you want. I'm not a big proponent of the lotus posture unless you come from a culture where that's normal, or you've been trained from a very early age to do that and you can do it comfortably, or you have a lot of time to work with a yoga teacher to allow you to get in there, again, comfortably. Sitting up in a chair straight or sitting on your bed straight, perfectly fine. Just sit up straight. But anyway, back to the point, you have to be truthful about what are your limitations physically, with time, your ability to concentrate. You have to figure out what those things are. And then you live within those. And you gently, slowly expand them. You push yourself little by little. When it comes to truthfulness within your thoughts, due to worry, we don't always know what the truth is. And again, this is why truthfulness becomes difficult, because when our minds are clouded by stress and anxiety and all the input from people in our past and all the worries and things that have been laid upon us and that we've accepted, it becomes very hard to be truthful in our thoughts because we don't know what's true. Is it true that what my grandma said is that if I drive down the road at night when it's raining, I'm going to have a car crash? Do you have that deep down inside somewhere? Is that true? Maybe not. Maybe, who knows? Depends on how you drive. So part of truth in thought and truth in emotions and truth in body requires learning to feel and know what is true. And that's going to take a lot of sorting through. That's really a lot of the work that you're going to be doing. Sorting through all that. And how do you do that? You pay attention to those moments and those times when you are telling the truth, when you are embodying your own truth, how you feel strong, connected, resonant. That is the feeling of truth. So you have to pay attention to when you actually say something that's true. My hair is brown. I love pizza. I enjoy playing music. Same thing. You can say negative things, and that's being honest and truthful as well. I don't like hamburgers. I don't like when you yell at me like that. That is a truth. And when you say those things that are really true for you and you feel what that feels like in your heart, then you know what truth feels like. And then when you're thinking crazy thoughts, you can observe the thoughts and feel your heart and see, well, is that actually true? And if it's not, then you've got to do whatever it takes for you. I cannot tell you what to do because there's no secret net that scoops down in your brain and throws out these thoughts that aren't true. You have to find your way of learning to banish or ignore or dissolve that thought. Meditation does a wonderful job just by simply letting it exhaust itself. But the point we're trying to get out with Satya is learning through your own practice of the truth as best you know how. You're going to figure this out by trying, by doing, by working it out, by figuring it out. Just like when you ride a bike. I can tell you all the basics of riding a bike, but you're not going to figure out how to ride that bike, the balance required, until you actually get on, fall down a few times, hurt yourself, and figure it out. The same is true with truthfulness, except that it might take you a little bit longer, depending on how untruthful you've been to yourself and others throughout most of your life. Because the more untruthful you are, the more friends you've been around who are untruthful or manipulative or whatever, the harder it is to really know what truth feels like. Maybe you've heard the term gaslighting. Gaslighting. That's when you're in a relationship with someone that tells you lies all the time as though they are true. And so your whole compass of what is truthful gets turned around, and you don't know what's true, what's up from what's down. And so oftentimes the world, our families, our friends have gaslighted us. And so we don't know what's up from down. So we have to start to commit to working that out. And that all comes from you yourself, doing your best as you know how to practice what is true for you and feel what that feels like inside. And then when you're thinking about something or you're presented with a situation, you can tune in to see, does this feel true? Does this feel right? And go from there. Remember that this is an ongoing process. It's going to be situational. It's going to be appropriate to the moment. And you will evolve. What was true for me in my early 20s was not what was true for me necessarily in my late 20s, which is not necessarily a variation of it was not necessarily true for me in my early 30s and so on. Late 30s, it's different. There is a thread of similarity of that truth, but it's like it becomes more refined. You grow into it more. So look at it as a work in progress. Asteya, non-stealing. Non-stealing. Different things could be said about non-stealing. Basically, don't steal from people. Don't take what is not yours. In your mind, don't covet what is other people's. When people have great fortune and great joy, don't be envious. Be happy for them. They're an aspect of yourself in some way, shape, or form. Practice loving kindness towards them. Be happy for their own good fortune. Usually, the more happy you are for other people's good fortune, the more good fortune you actually experience. It's very straightforward. Really contemplate what I just said. Rewind the last 60 seconds and play that over and over again until you get it, because I'm not going to harp on that too much. Non-stealing also requires faith, trust, and surrender. We live in a world where there are at times lack. There are at times deficit. There are times of famine. And in those times, people become scared. People want to hoard and have everything that they can, just in case. But when you practice non-stealing, you're not looking at the world as an alien planet where you are sort of a foreign invader, or you are a foreigner and then there are all these invaders around. A lot of people look at it that way. And what we need to start doing is, this is the hard part, because the world doesn't necessarily give us this impression, especially when we watch the news or listen to more small-minded people. The world provides for us what we need, when we need it, so long as we are doing our best to stay within our truth. And there may be times when you might have to go into debt. There may be times when you don't have enough to put in your savings account that month. Or there may be times when you have to spend more out of your savings than you want to. That's just the flow of energy. And when we learn to practice surrender and faith and peace and trust in that, we often find that we don't need to be afraid, because when we do require some support, it actually comes. And I can speak to this very clearly. When I was first in college and first out of college, I didn't make much money. In fact, pretty much the entirety of my 20s, I didn't make much money. But then again, I lived in West Virginia, where it was extremely cheap. You've heard me discuss how I lived on a 13-acre farm with a farmhouse for like $400 a month or something like that. But I didn't have a whole lot of money. But the weirdest things would happen. When I would need a vehicle, someone would call me and say, hey, our company is liquidating some inventory, and we've got this old truck. I'll sell it to you for $250, this old Ford Ranger. And at first I said, well, I've got a car, so we don't need another one. And we only had one car at the time. And I told him that, and then someone overheard me say that, and they said, hey, you need some money? He's like, I'll give you $250. Like, all right. So I got this Ford Ranger. It was beat to hell. It was all rusted out. It was a 2-wheel drive, but it ran wonderfully it had 100, somewhere close to 200,000 miles on it. When I got done, it had over close to 300,000 miles on it. It ran beautifully. Was I driving a Lexus, whatever, or a Corvette? No, but I had what I needed, and it worked out wonderfully because I was not caught up in the sort of craving for these things. But also I didn't have a lot of money, and I would worry about money because my family worried about money a lot. And even though I didn't have a lot of money, I always had enough to pay my rent, to get groceries, to buy gas, to pay my car insurance, and so on. I wasn't saving at all during that time, but I always had enough. And in time, the more I started to trust that I will have enough, that as long as I do my best to work hard, to be true to myself, and in time, it grew to the point to where, hey, in my 30s, I can actually start saving money in an IRA. We can have a savings account now. All these things, we can buy a house, started working out, and I was not worried about these things. In the beginning, when we moved to Asheville, I was, because Asheville is an insanely expensive place. But the same thing, the more I tried to stay in this focus of being happy for other people's success, because there were plenty of people around me who had oodles and oodles and oodles more than we had, the better it worked, the better it worked out. So this idea of non-stealing, it's not just not taking from other people. It's not being greedy. It's not being worried about money. It's about doing the work you need to do to provide for yourself and trusting the rest of life, which is the rest of you, to provide for you. To being okay when there are times when you have to spend a lot of money because you need a new transmission, or your roof is leaking, or someone has a medical bill, or whatever it might be. It's okay. Just do your best to trust in the process while working and managing things well. And when you see other people who have more than you, who have a better car than you, who are able to go on wonderful Costa Rican meditation retreats. Be happy for their good fortune. Be happy for their good fortune. When you can take someone out to eat and pay for them, do that. I've always done that. Anytime I could, if I had the extra money and I was out to eat with someone, I would pay for their meal, because it just seems nice. And I remember when people did that for me, it felt good. It felt supportive. So not only is non-stealing just not taking, it's also giving when you can. Giving when you can. Letting go of that worry. It goes beyond that even. Non-stealing. Do not covet thy neighbor's spouse. Things of that nature. When you covet something of someone else, in a sense, you're, sort of wanting to steal it in your mind. So again, you can be happy for the other person. And that is a very good thing. One other very important point to remember about non-stealing is that just because someone else has a lot more money than you, just because someone else has a bigger bank account, or better food, or a nicer car, that has absolutely no bearing on their state of inner contentment, happiness, and maturity. And I've thought about this for a long time, because I've known people who've been extremely wealthy, had everything they wanted, even perfect children, perfect family, and they still have this nagging feeling deep down inside. And I've met people who've had absolutely nothing, that are content and happy. But then again, I've met the gamut. I've also met people who've had absolutely nothing, that are bitter and cruel, as well as I've met people who are wealthy and have a deep sense of contentment and spirituality. So I'm not making a statement that one is better than the other. What I'm saying is that they don't correlate. They don't correlate. So keep in mind that coveting someone else's status or wealth or things that they have, it's really silly, because that doesn't mean that they're happy inside. It doesn't mean that they have faith. It doesn't mean that they're certain of their connection with the wholeness of life. And that is the most important thing. Because when you have that, no matter what's going on within you, around you, between you and another, between you and God, you're clear. You're clear. So always keep in mind that when you do start to have a sense of coveting someone else's good fortune or wealth or whatever it might be, that you don't really know what they're like inside. Just like non-stealing. When you see people locked in meditation or spending all that time in meditation, having all that time for meditation, you don't have hardly any time at all. Well, you don't really know how well they're meditating. Trust me on this. You don't know how well they're meditating. When you see people who are able to go to these talks with these wonderful gurus, well, number one, you don't know what their internal state is, nor do you know if that guru is real and actually helping them. You cannot go by outer appearances or popularity. You cannot. That is also does not correlate. So when it comes to Asteya and non-stealing, again, it comes back to this idea of truthfulness. What is the truth of the matter? You don't always know the truth of the matter of someone else's situation. But ultimately, do your best, and you have to practice this. These yamas are not just recommendations. They are required. They are required for effective yoga practice. And even if you only can practice one of them, what you will find is the others, you start to realize, oh, okay, I see that is true. And you start implementing it naturally. So take this seriously. And when you're going about your day and you notice someone having more than you and you have a sense of envy and want, you got to deal with that right now. See it in your mind and turn it around. Be very, very, very happy for their success, for the love that they have, for the wealth that they have. Bless them for having it. Bless them for having it. And this will start to alter and increase your capacity to practice Asteya. The next yama, brahmacharya. And this is the one that many people become enamored with. Why? Because it gives them a chance to go a little nutty about extremes. People love extremes. They love black and white. Many people, especially interested in yoga and meditation, they won't admit it, but as Alan Watts has said, they're very much into competitive suffering. And brahmacharya is the perfect focal point for those kinds of things to develop around. Why? Because it's often interpreted as celibacy. One of the most misunderstood things about being human, about spirituality, deals with sexuality. People want it black or white, all or the other extreme, and so on. So it's either all or nothing. You either got to be no sexual interest whatsoever, or you're worldly, and that's a problem. Sexuality is a normal function of your human body. If your hormones are healthy, you're going to want to be intimate with someone. When it comes to relationships, sexuality and intimacy, it's wonderful for your health. It's wonderful, again, to balance your hormones. Even just skin-to-skin contact creates something called oxytocin, which has a very calming effect on an individual. But anyway, brahmacharya is not just simply celibacy. It can also mean going like God, or non-excess, or conservation of your vital resources. And that doesn't make sense. As we discussed earlier on, if you want to accomplish something, you have to be able to direct the proper amount of time and attention towards that task, towards that goal. If you want to be a doctor, you have to have the money to go to med school. You have to have the time and devotion to study, the wherewithal to stick with it. You have to direct your vital forces to the support of that work. You cannot be an excessive partier. You cannot be wrapped up in too many family issues. You cannot be excessive in anything. You have to keep the proper balance so that you are successful becoming a medical practitioner. The same thing with yoga, contentment, inner work. You have to direct, you have to go like God. You have to direct everything that is required of you to have the experience that you're aiming to realize, which is why we practice all these previous things, which is why we practice meditation, which is why when a person is initiated into a practice, oftentimes they present a fruit, a flower, and a monetary donation during the initiation. Now, sure, many a teacher has gotten rich off of requiring support such as this. Maybe not all the flowers and the fruit. Maybe they stayed healthy, eating all those good vitamins. But, they really could draw it in. But that's not necessarily the point of those things. It's, in a sense, a expression of what your brahmacharya will be, because the fruit represents giving up your past karmas so that you can move into this new stage of being of your life. It's giving up the fruits of your karmas. It's giving up the fruits of your meditation practice, giving up the fruits of your yoga practice, knowing that you do your best, but it is ultimately the wholeness of life and God that does the work, if you will. It's giving up the fruits of your practice. The flower represents your devotion. The flower represents your devotion. How much devotion, how much love and time and attention are you going to give to this practice? The financial donation represents the energy of your life being directed towards this practice, in the sense of you will direct your money and your finances in such a way that it will support this practice, meaning you will work hard enough so that you can have a quiet home, potentially if you're a householder, that you can sit and meditate in. That you will not overwork yourself. You will not do it to amass large quantities of money excessively. So you'll not overwork yourself for the sake of money. You will work enough to where you can save and you can be healthy and you can be financially secure, but you'll work enough that you can spend time in meditation and actually contemplate and applying these principles. When it comes to sexuality, again, it's very normal to have sexual expression in your life. When does it become a problem? When you're walking down the street and every person you see, you turn into some fantasy. Okay, you got to get a handle on that. And you might think that it's human nature for people to be obsessed with sex in that way. And I would say that it is not. I would say that it is a function of some deep unsatisfaction within one's life, as well as deep inability to be truthful to oneself and what one's real needs are, and that gets sublimated into this sexual thing. And also there might be psychological issues that keep one fixated on sexuality. Because sexuality is a lower chakra thing, and I'm not saying that as judgment, I'm just saying that that's what it is. And just like it is extremely normal and makes sense for a teenager to be nuts about sex, because as their hormones are going crazy, they're just discovering things. But as a person matures, they start to realize sex is a beautiful, wonderful thing when you're with someone you love. And it's really wonderful for procreation. But the more you focus on it, whether you've got some kind of mini addiction or whatever it might be, the more it wastes your time. And again, you can say to yourself, well, that's pretty boring. Well, you know what? You just have to consider what's important to you. If you're focused on bodies and beauty and sensual pleasures, this may not necessarily be the path for you. Because once you have a feeling, a realization, an inkling, an understanding of what is beyond this physical world, this physical body, sexuality, while it can still be enjoyable, just becomes what it is, just a function. Just a function. And you pay attention to it when it's there and appropriate, and other than that, you do whatever you're supposed to do with the rest of your day in your life. So, with brahmacharya, we have to be extremely cautious and careful. Because you can have people who are practicing what they usually consider to be brahmacharya, which is celibacy, but every time a girl walks by, if they're a man, they're lusting. When they're staying in meditation, all they're aware of is the feeling within their loins. That's not really brahmacharya. That's not true brahmacharya. True brahmacharya is, okay, we need to redirect this energy. We need to put our attention on something else constructive that is appropriate right now. So true celibacy is not only not having sex, but it's also not thinking about it, not really being involved in it. You're just not there. Your energy has gone somewhere else. You have taken that energy and redirected it, whether upwards or to a project or whatever it may be. That is true brahmacharya in regards to celibacy. But you can practice brahmacharya in a relationship, in a marriage, just like if you think about, since I live in Asheville and there's a lot of mountain biking, people who mountain bike. Well, let's treat mountain biking as sex. All right. Well, the people who mountain bike, sure, throughout the week they might think to themselves occasionally how wonderful it would be to go mountain biking on Sunday. But that's about it. The rest of the time, they're doing their work, they're doing their things, and then when Sunday comes along, they go to town on that mountain bike. They just have a wonderful time. But other times, they're focused on what is important. That would be like proper brahmacharya. With sexuality, okay, you're going through your week, you got kids to take care of, you got other things to do. Every now and then it might enter your mind, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful if my spouse and I could have a date night on Saturday, and just wonderful things we could do to each other. All right, you think about it for a few minutes, you file it away, and then when Saturday night comes along, you knock yourselves out, you get up on Sunday, you've really enjoyed yourselves, and now you go about your day. That's practicing brahmacharya. The problem with brahmacharya when it comes to sexuality is our culture puts an overemphasis on the physical form, an overemphasis on physical joys and pleasures, and so therefore we get sidetracked by it. And then we say things like, but we have to have a healthy sexuality, which means we should be able to express whenever we want. It becomes aberrant, and that becomes masked by interesting psychological fads, usually promoted by people who have not worked through the issues of sexuality themselves and are stuck at that level. Now, that's a pretty hard stance, and you can think about that whatever you want, and you can do whatever you want with that information. Personally, it doesn't matter to me, but I think you will find that in time, this will somewhat make a little bit more sense the more you practice the previous yamas, and even the further yamas and the niyamas and the rest of your meditation practice, because all this stuff is going to help you grow emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. There's no way you can avoid it. And to be fixated on something that was appropriate to you when you were younger kind of starts to feel a little silly the older you get. Being a musician and really loving loud music when I was younger, and I still like it to a degree because I find it fascinating. But I remember the most recent band that I was in, and at one point I was up there on stage and I was playing, and I was really enjoying playing it, but then I sort of thought to myself, this really isn't the same as it was when I was 22. It just didn't have the same feel. So I outgrew that kind of need to express in that loud, intense environment, because maybe I'm getting old. Maybe this is what happens when you get old. But the subtler things in life become more enjoyable. And you'll find that to be true the more you practice brahmacharya, the more you practice all of these things. So brahmacharya, along with Satya, there's a lot of subtlety to this. And with brahmacharya, what we have to remember is what it means is going like God, or essentially directing all the resources, all the time, all the devotion required to your spiritual practice and to this entire process. That's what it means. Being very understanding that every aspect of your life is managed towards this end. And you have to decide really how much of that you're interested in. Because some people really, truly, they just want to kind of feel good in life. They just want to be able to kind of deal with the troubles as they arise and get through it. Other people, they really have an intense drive to know what God is, what self is, what it really takes to experience inner peace. And if that's the case, then they really do need to consider pretty much every action in relationship to that. You'll find this with all great people. The artist who sacrifices their diet and their money and their friendships and everything because they have a vision of their art until that vision comes to fruition. They are practicing brahmacharya to bring that to fruition. The person who has a drive to start a non-profit to serve a certain type of people, they work too hard. They give their all to it. Everything they do, every penny that they consider, they put towards it. That is brahmacharya in directing all the resources to that. So when we're going towards God or going like God, we have to consider, is the step I'm taking, is the thought I'm thinking, is the emotion I'm feeling, is it drawing me closer, or is it pushing me away? Because imagine that you're walking down a road and all you're doing all day long is walking 3 steps forward, walking 8 steps back, walking 10 steps forward, walking 3 steps back, walking 1 step forward, walking 12 steps back. That's not practicing brahmacharya. That's a bit kind of insane. If you're trying to get down the road, every step you take, ideally, unless you got to step over a pothole or sidetrack something, is towards the goal. So think of it like that. And this can be somewhat overwhelming for certain people. Do your best. Do your best. I don't want to encourage any kind of fanaticism. I don't want to encourage you to be violent towards yourself, where you force yourself into a way of being that is not, at this point in time, what's the word? Which you cannot handle. taking someone who's been really, truly worldly and materialistic all their life. And many people who say they're interested in spirituality and New Age philosophy, they're really materialistic because they're really just wanting to do it to improve a physical thing in their life. That's very common. But if you take one of those people and you say, all right, you really want to know God? That's what you keep telling me. When really deep down inside, they're saying, what I really want is just a nice family and some extra cash and, the end of the skin condition, whatever it might be. But they're saying they want God. If you take them and you stick them in a monastery where you say, every breath is for God, every meal you eat, it's going to be bland, but you're making that sacrifice for God. You're going to work hard all day for God. You're going to pray at morning, noon, and night for God. You stick someone in that environment. And they're going to go mad because it's not true for them. So you have to find your own, again, truth. You have to find your own way in this regard. And that is why earlier in previous classes, when people have asked me about certain meditation techniques and why did I choose Kriya Yoga, or why don't I do this particular kind of pranayama and these sorts of things. Well, for me, it was never a thought of, am I going to do Kriya Yoga or am I going to do Vipassana? Never occurred to me. I just found Kriya Yoga, made sense, I started doing it. It never occurred to me to do different kinds of practices, even though other people promoted them. It was just natural for me to do this. As I matured through my 20s and 30s and into my late 30s and so on, there are many things that I forced upon myself that I eventually grew into naturally. Many of these yamas and niyamas which I've described. So it's not that you have to be violent with yourself and force yourself into this new way of being. You have to gently coax yourself and train yourself into it. Just like if you think about sculpting a bonsai tree, you don't just go in there and bend the branches every which way and mangle the roots thinking that that's going to work, that's going to kill the tree. What you do is very gently, maybe day by day or week by week or month by month, you make a little change and you let that set. A little later you make another change and you let that set. So with brahmacharya, moderation is also important when it comes to change so that you don't blow a gasket, that you're able to take the turn, you're able to make that 90-degree turn without tearing up your suspension. So slow down, think about it, and apply what you can, and just be committed in a contented fashion to making these changes daily and think about them daily. Have a journal, write things down, what your thoughts are, how you did with all of these things. Maybe pick one particular yama a day to focus on. Pick one a day, or one a week even, or one a month. That would be wonderful. Where you really go into it, and every day you start out, okay, this is how I see my day going. This is where I know I'm going to have to be very focused for this particular yama. And at the end of the day, you review, how did I do? And you decide tomorrow to do better, and you keep going in that way. This will also be a practice of brahmacharya. The next yama we want to consider, Aparigraha, non-possessiveness. A lot of this, I believe, I probably jumped ahead and touched upon within non-stealing. But we'll take some time to speak to non-possessiveness, maybe on some more global or possibly esoteric ways. So non-possessiveness, we've already discussed non-stealing and why that's important. Non-possessiveness, when you are possessive, you are trapped in the idea of I, me, and mine, which is your small sense of self. And of course, you need that small sense of self to navigate this world, this dream creation of this world, because otherwise, well, you wouldn't really be able to have any kind of experience to speak of. You just contemplate that a little bit. But when you are possessive and you're stuck in this idea of I, me, and mine, it brings up this great sense of lack, as though you won't be provided for, as though there's not enough. And it can be very hard to see sometimes in this world that you don't need to worry. It can be very hard to see that you have everything that you need, particularly in times of great financial stress, in times of war, in times of health crisis, in times of emotional family stress. It can be very hard to see that. But one of the ways I've always looked at it was, so if I've been around roughly 40 years, and I'm still here, and I still have the means to make these recordings, I've got the equipment that can do it, I've got the time, I've got the drive, I've got the health to do it. If I've got all that, obviously, no matter how bad things had been in the ups and downs of these past 40 years, or how good they have been, I'm still here. I still made it. I've been supported through it all, because otherwise, if I had not been supported through it all, this would not be possible. This would not be possible. And again, when I do these kinds of classes, my goal is to make them on a donation basis. And that's for a couple reasons. And there's also a reason why I don't set up a nonprofit. Who knows, maybe when I get older and more wise in the ways of the world, I will do something like that. But the reason that I don't do that is, in a sense, to practice this non-possessiveness and non-greed. Because my thought is, I will do this work as long as I am able. As long as the resources are there, the funds are there, I can breathe. As long as I'm able, as long as the support is there, as long as it is a part of, is it of interest to life to make this possible, I will do it. And if I was running around all day trying to crank up my prices, say, no, you can't take this class unless you pay $3,000 to $5,000 or $100, whatever it might be. Well, number one, I'm not practicing brahmacharya, because now I got to spend all my time bartering and hassling and these sorts of things. But I'm saying, I'm being, in a sense, possessive of what I think this stuff is worth. But when I do it such that it's on a donation basis and people can share what their means are, well, then I know I have immediate feedback. Is this important for life? Does life want this work to be discussed? Does life want me? Does it want to work through this temple, this body, this vessel, to discuss these things? If the resources, if the funds are there, I do it. If they're not, and I got to focus on something else, paying my bill some other way, or whatever it might be, then I don't. So this non-possessiveness allows me to gauge, am I in tune with what God or life wants me to be doing right now? It's one way we can look at this idea of non-possessiveness and non-greed. I'm doing my best to not be greedy, even though every now and then I get a comment about how I am being greedy by charging $27 or $54 for a 26-hour course, which I still find interesting. But I'll work on that. It's just my own little contemplation that I don't quite get. But also, going back to the initial idea, you are still alive. You are still here. You are still functional. Not only are you alive, still here, and still functional, but think about the generations of human beings from the beginning of human time that have had to survive, to thrive, so that you could be here right now. The hundreds, the thousands of years, they were supported. They were supported. So when we think about non-possessiveness, we need to think on a much broader global scale and realize that if for some reason we are in a lack, maybe it's because we're being inspired to focus on something else. Maybe we're inspired to work on our work ethic. Maybe we're being inspired to get over ourselves in regards to how we think we should be taken care of. Maybe. Or maybe when we're in a lack and we have nothing else we can do, maybe we're being given quiet time for inner reflection. Also, when you think about possession, think about the things you own. You define yourselves through them. Think about your car. You define yourself through your car. Think about your family. You define yourself through your family. And by defining yourself through them, you are possessing them. You are saying, that is me. That is a part of me. And what does that do? We use the analogy of making it easier to climb the mountain in the previous class. But what possessiveness does is it adds more and more and more baggage for you that you have to, you got to cast it off eventually anyway. You're not going to be able to take it anywhere beyond this lifetime, and not even then usually. And so the more possessive you are of things, of defining yourself through things, and that's not just things, that's also your thoughts, your beliefs, your judgments, your feelings. Many people are possessive of that feeling of anxiety. You take away that feeling of anxiety, they have a breakdown like you wouldn't believe. You take away that feeling of fear, they don't know who they are, they flip out. You can be possessive of those things too. I know I've mentioned this previously, but it's like when we've taken people on retreats, say to Costa Rica or other places, what inevitably always happens when they first get there, and it's quiet and it's peaceful and it's serene, and they're just out of their mind ecstatic, oh, I just love this peace, this is just wonderful. But the people who have had really hectic, frenetic lives, or who have been sort of distracting themselves through whatever options that they had available to them, when it gets about midweek, what happens? Breakdowns left and right. People then all of a sudden are confronted with all the things that they define themselves by and how they're not there, and they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know who they are without these feelings, without these dramas, without these emotions, without these belongings. And so they break down. So by practicing non-possessiveness, you lessen your chance of mental insanity. You then are able to walk through this world knowing that you don't really own anything. Everything is just a passing energy of God and consciousness. And when it's there, it's there. When it's not, it's not. It's the wave rising and falling. But again, what I need to stress for you is that it's not just possessing things. Okay, my house has been destroyed. I've lost all my family. I don't have any money. Who am I? I'm lost. I'm distraught. I don't know what to do. That's the type of possessiveness that helps you from looking around and doing the grieving that you need to do, but then moving on because you're still alive. There's still life there. It's amazing what can happen from summer to fall to winter to spring again. And by winter, I'm talking about the loss of things. But let's say you're not attached to all that, and those things come and they go. And then you do your grieving, but then you say, all right, well, life, what now? And you follow that guidance of God, of your inner consciousness. But we have to take it further, because the reason people often don't experience self-realization is because they are so attached to, addicted to their small sense of self, that low-grade fear that they carry around, that belief system that they have to act and live and be and do a certain way, otherwise everything will go to hell. That fear that they carry around, no matter who it's from. It could be from a traumatic experience. It could be from simply the way your parents talk to you, or you just don't know any better. And they can't make the jump into clarity of consciousness because you can't bring those things with you. So by learning to let go of, to get some detachment from them, by not being possessive of these things, not only is it easier for you to flow through life, but it also makes it easier for you to know what God, divine consciousness is, which is timeless, which is beyond possession, which is all things. Just like there was a word, phrase, or saying that came to mind, the idea that you have to, when it comes to meditation, really and truly, you cannot think of anything but God for it to work. Okay, you cannot think of anything but God. Now again, we're taking the stance that the things of the world are not God. We know that everything is God, but just follow me in this train of thought. That means when you go into meditation, you can only think of God if all of these fears, these distractions are there and you feel so safe with them. You will never release them. You will never let those fluctuations and changes just exhaust themselves, and you will never have that aha moment. So non-possessiveness, one of the most wonderful of the foundations for Kriya Yoga practice, because not only will it help you through life, let you see just how seamless and supportive life can be, even when you can't appreciate it, even when you think it's just grabbing you by the hair and beating you into a wall. In time, if you can get past that, you will see the wholeness of life. And when you meditate, when you sit to meditate, if you let go of all of your possessions, not just who you think you're related to, not just the things that you own, not just the house that you feel comfortable in, but you let go of your fear, you let go of your depression, you let go of your anxiety, you make way for faith, you make way for surrender, you make way to really go beyond the mind and these definitions and experience your timeless nature. That's what happens when you practice non-possessiveness. Some people have said, they use the term Vishnu for God, and some saints see everything as God, so everything is Vishnu. So if something good happens to someone, they say, oh, well, that's great. Vishnu happened to Vishnu. The good thing, which is Vishnu, happened to Vishnu, the thing that it happened to. When something bad thing happens, like, oh, well, what does it matter? Vishnu just happened to Vishnu. And that's a bit of a stretch for you to think about. But some people see things that way. And that is another way of ending non-possessiveness, which will help you in this temporal life, while it will also support your Kriya Yoga practice and your yoga practice and meditation practice, because life, yoga, meditation, they are synonymous. They are all one thing, one process. And ahimsa, nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, brahmacharya, aparigraha, non-possessiveness, these all create such a profound foundation which will make all the difference in the world. If we did a study and we had 50 rats in one group, 50 rats in another group, and 50 rats in a third group, and we took the first 50 rats and we said, all we want you to do is to practice these techniques, these Kriya Yoga techniques. That's all we want you to do. And we took the second group and we said, we want you to practice these Kriya Yoga techniques, but do your best to devote your life in a loving, kind, joyous way to also practicing to the best of your ability, nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, conserving your vital resources, and non-possessiveness. Do that. Give it your best. Just do your best in a very gentle, kind fashion. And we took the third group of rats and we said, have fun, do whatever you want. Drink from your water bottle, eat your food, mate, burrow, who knows, just do whatever you want. And we would come back a year later and we would look at each of those rats. We would probably find that the third group didn't change very much. They're still just making babies, pooping all over the place, drinking their water and eating their food, digging their little burrows. We'd look at the second group, and we'd see that 50 to 75% of those rats are more calm, peaceful. They seem to act with more wisdom. They seem to embody the joy of life itself. And then we look at the first group, who is just doing the techniques, and we'd get maybe 10 to 15% of those rats expressing the calm, peacefulness, joy, and wisdom that we saw. If we could only do a study like that, right? That would be wonderful. If only we had rats that would volunteer for that study. But this is what makes all the difference. And this is, along with the niyamas, which we will discuss in our next section, are what contribute to the kind of realization and understanding people like Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Mahasaya, that they have experienced. That's what makes all the difference. So please consider these as a most important foundation and ingredient for your practice. Remember, meditation and the techniques are those intensive training periods, but they are training periods for the rest of your life. And the rest of your life will be practicing these things. And these things will help you mentally and emotionally so that you're more prepared for higher and clearer realizations and the responsibility that comes with that. Okay, so we'll conclude here for today. I think that's enough for now.